Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Behold the Savior as we go through a special presentation as we're continuing our series on understanding creation and evolution. This time we're going to take a look at understanding creation and evolution in the animals. What does the evidence lead to in the animals? We're going to look at how did life begin. That's a really profound one. That's really, where all of this is sort of leading to, or the questions go from. How did life begin anyway? We're going to look at understanding creation and evolution according to the textbooks and incredible creatures. We're going to look at some wonderful animals that God has given us, and we're going to see, do they scream of evidence of a creator? Well, let's jump into it. Let's look at how in the world did life begin anyway. This is a picture that you will often see depicted in science, and it says that, life began in the primordial soup, the ooze, and then it began to branch off. Some life became plants, some life became animals, and eventually you have man standing at the top there. And this is what science is very much pushing and has been pushing for some time now. And remember, let's take a look at the geological column again. Now, we've taken a look at this a few times in our series, and I've sort of cheated you. I haven't really given you an explanation of why we see different animals at different layers in the geological column, and really it makes good sense. Remember, there's nowhere on Earth that you can go slice a mountain open and you can see a complete record in order like this. It just does not happen. But why do we see, mammals and so on at the top and other little creepy crawlies at the bottom? Well, it makes good sense. Remember, if there was a worldwide flood, like the Bible says that there was, that would have destroyed much of the life on Earth. By the way, the dinosaur footprints that we find, do you know what direction they're pointing? They're all going uphill. Now, you can't tell that now by the angle because there's been depressions and impressions, but the angle of the actual imprint in tells us that they were going uphill. Why is that? Because as the water's rising, the animals are fleeing from the rising water to escape it. Mud comes, water comes, hits it, and creatures are fossilized instantly. Why do we see mammals at the top and other creatures at the bottom? Well, mammals and birds, when they die, they bloat, they float, and they disarticulate, then come to the bottom, and or the fish disarticulate rather and go to the bottom quicker. So the birds and animals tend to float, the other animals tend to sink quicker. Really, it's as simple as that. Not all that complicated. Good, simple science tells us, and that's how we easily explain the paleontological column. Well, let's take a look at how science says Earth began. This is what Earth supposedly looked like originally. Earth was a very volcanic atmosphere, looked quite different than it does today according to science. And we want to know how did it go from that to this? Well, there was a man by the name of Stanley Miller that conducted an experiment. And he conjectured that the atmosphere consisted of methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, and water. And Stanley Miller attempted to create this by passing sparks through these gases and trap at the bottom what was formed and analyzed it. And he did actually find organic material. So he conjectured that originally life began in this organic soup with lots of molecules, then formed themselves over long periods of time and formed themselves into the first living organism. The problem is the atmosphere would have to exclude oxygen. And if the atmosphere excluded oxygen, it would have been a degrading atmosphere rather than an upgrading atmosphere. So this was known as the amino acid synthesis in 1953. Newspaper headlines proclaimed life has been created, but actually this experiment disproved the possibility that evolution could occur, and this is the reason here. The experiment only proved that a synthetic production of them would result in equal amounts of left or right-handed amino acids. Since only left-handed ones exist in animals, accidental production could never produce a living creature. Not only that, but the amino acids were totally dead. Life could have emerged from either left or right-handed amino acids, but not both. Now remember, in this cycle that Stanley Miller trapped what was formed, but where was the trap in real life? Where was this trap on the Earth? It didn't exist. So, and some people ask, they say, well, if some scientist somewhere was able to create an experiment in a lab and create life, wouldn't that prove evolution? And I say, actually, it would prove the exact opposite. It would prove what I've been saying the whole time. It would prove that an intelligent being created life in a lab. That's what we've been saying the whole time. Well, let's take a look at the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy. And it says that systems will eventually become totally random and disorganized. It repudiates the possibility that either matter or life could evolve into greater complexity. Everything tends to run down and wear out. And I live in western Pennsylvania area, and they grow a lot of really good potholes there. And other industries throughout the world, they have good farming and things. We grow a lot of good potholes out there. Why? Because roads left to themselves will tend to break down and wear out. That road left over years and decades and centuries, those roads are not going to get better and rebuild and smooth out and be perfect. It's going to get worse and worse and worse, and eventually there's going to be even less road than there is already. What's the point? That's the second law of thermodynamics in action. All things tend to break down and wear out. Things are not getting better, things seem to be getting worse. Left to themselves, they're not improving, they are going downhill. Albert Einstein had something to say about this. He declared that of all the laws of physics, there were two laws at the time, the two laws of thermodynamics would never be negated or replaced. In other words, science has to violate laws of nature for evolution to be correct. We've seen this already with the law of conservation of angular momentum. We've studied that in session number 1. You can look that video back up if you would like to. Understanding creation and evolution in time and space. Here we see the law of entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics. All things tend to break down and wear out. But let's continue here. Could life accidentally arise? 250 proteins are required for absolute minimum basic life to function. And the equivalent of those proteins just randomly coming together and happening is the equivalent of hitting a jackpot on a slot machine 250 times in a row. Now, if you've ever went to the casino, played a slot machine, you would know you don't hit the jackpot. And maybe you've heard somebody else win here or there, but you certainly aren't nailing it 250 times in a row. In other words, it's impossible. In fact, the chances of that happening are 1 in a trillion. In other words, it doesn't happen. It's impossible for life to actually come about and function on its own. Not only that, but once that initial single cell was developed, they die so quickly, they would have to be able to reproduce very, very, very quickly and keep growing. Otherwise, life does not continue and exist. Louis Pasteur disproved the theory of spontaneous generation many years ago, and he did this with an experiment. At this time, they thought that, well, if you leave some open food out on a counter, it would produce some fruit flies. You throw some old rags or something in the corner and, it would produce rats. So he wanted to put this to the test. So he got 3 flasks. The first flask was unsealed. He put a chunk of meat in there, and of course what he found was that the flies were coming and laying eggs and maggots and so on. Second flask was completely sealed, piece of meat on the inside, but there was nothing on top, nothing inside. And then he used a flask that was covered with gauze or cheesecloth, actually, and the flies couldn't get down inside. They were getting to the scent of it, and they were reproducing up there. So what did this prove? This proved that life cannot arise from non-life. This was disproved by Louis Pasteur in 1861, And it's still being taught in textbooks today that life can arise from non-life. After all, isn't that the very basis of the Big Bang Theory? Let's continue here. This is a Nobel Prize winner, Francis Crick. He came up with the directed panspermia theory. He says that life was seeded here on Earth. He says that aliens did it. And this has become actually pretty popular. And another theory, there's a documentary you can watch called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. And it was, years ago, it was to the point where evolution wasn't allowed to be taught in school. Now it's to the point where really creation or intelligent design is not allowed to be taught in school. And the interviewer, Ben Stein, who's doing the documentary, he interviews someone and says, well, I want to know, how did life begin? How did life begin? He says, well, it's easy. Life formed on the back of crystals. He said, okay. Well, how does that happen? He said, well, life was formed on the back of crystals. He said, okay, well, I understand that. I get that it's formed on the back of crystals, but how does that happen? How did life begin? And he said, what, are you, an idiot? Don't you hear what I'm telling you? Life formed on the back of crystals. That's an interesting corner to be backed into without having really any proof or any answer to it. There's another man by the name of Richard Dawkins. He is a leading evolutionist, does not necessarily like creationist Christians or even those that believe in the intelligent design theory. He was asked a question, how did life begin? That's a good question. And he puts it this way, I don't know. And you have to give him credit for being honest. How did life begin? I don't know. Perhaps life was delivered to our planet by highly evolved aliens. If you look, you can find evidence of some sort of a designer. Now, this is a man that will not agree in a creative God, but he would believe in aliens. He doesn't believe in creation, but he believes in intelligent design. Somebody, somehow, somewhere, intelligent design put us here on Earth. He just happens to think that aliens did it. So let's talk about intelligent design for a bit here. Intelligent design is this. It says that a supreme being created us, and they don't necessarily call it God. We believe it was God, but it's just saying that somebody somewhere out there created life here on Earth. Science cannot consider this idea. And let's go back to 1925. There was a trial, the state of Tennessee versus John Thomas Scopes. It was also known as the Scopes monkey trial. John Scopes was accused of violating Tennessee's Butler Act, which made it unlawful to teach human evolution in any state-funded school. Scopes purposefully taught evolution to challenge the Butler Act. William Jennings Bryan was a three-time presidential candidate. He argued for the prosecution, and Clarence Darrow, the famed defense attorney, spoke for Scopes, and he was an agnostic. See, the whole world has turned upside down. It used to be illegal to teach evolution. Now it's illegal essentially to teach creation. And what is there a reason for this? We need to take a look at what our children are learning in the textbooks. Let's take a look at some textbooks and find what our children are being taught in schools today. Let's take a look at what lies in the textbooks. I remember seeing this when I was in school, which wasn't all that long ago. This is Ernest Haeckel's pen and ink drawings, a series of pen and ink drawings, which he called the biogenetic law. And he came up with the idea that all life passes through this, since we're all evolved from the same thing, all life passes through the same phases in its beginning. So here you have his fish embryo. Here you have a real fish embryo. Here you have a salamander. Here you have an actual salamander. Here you have his turtle. Here you have an actual turtle. And you get the point, chicken, rabbit, humans. And he called this idea the biogenetic law, popularized in 1866. This is still used to convince students of evolution today. Here's what Michael Richardson said in 1998. Haeckel's drawings are substantially fabricated. In support of this view, I note that his oldest fish image is made up of bits and pieces from different animals, some of them mythical. It is not unreasonable to characterize this as faking it. Later editions of Haeckel's drawing were somewhat more accurate. Sadly, it is the discredited 1874 drawings that are used in so many British and American biology textbooks today. Discredited what year? 1874. Still used in textbooks today to convince students of evolution. And some people wonder, well, what about metamorphosis? You can see evolution taking place right before your eyes, can't you? With the idea of a caterpillar and a cocoon or chrysalis, and then it comes out and it becomes this big, beautiful butterfly. You can literally see it take place right before your eyes. Remember, science has to be verifiable and reproducible. You have to be able to reproduce it. Well, let's take a look at this. Does metamorphosis prove evolution? Well, here we have the cycle of it. So you have the adult butterfly that lays an egg, and out comes the larva, the caterpillar, and then it'll go into the pupa or chrysalis, and then it'll hatch out and it'll become a butterfly. Actually, it's a really wonderful thing to watch it happen. Once they come out, they have to sort of hang and pump blood through their wings, and they fan out. It literally becomes a different creature. The DNA is different, and I don't know how they know this, but they know now that evidently it's very uncomfortable for the caterpillar. It doesn't like this liquefaction and this whole process of becoming a new creature. But does this prove evolution? Butterfly to egg to larva to pupa. And then it'll happen again. The butterfly will lay an egg, it will have the larva, the pupa, and this will happen over and over and over and over and over again. Every single time it's going to be a butterfly to an egg to a larva. It will never be anything other than that. That's not evolution, that's the perfect DNA, that's the perfect computer code that God has ingrained into that creature. A butterfly is never going to lay an egg, and the larva comes out, and then it goes into a pupa, and it's never going to come out into a bird. It's never going to come out and hatch into a bat or an elephant or a mouse or anything like that. It will always be that cycle. It's fixed into it. So that's not evolution. That's simply a perfect design of God that we see at work there. Well, let's take a look at the Bernard Kettlewell's experiment with the pepper moths. He became convinced that darker pepper moths are becoming more numerous because of their camouflage was better on smoke-darkened tree trunks in industrial areas. And the theory was this, that the white peppered moths were camouflaged in the whiter areas, but industrialization comes and you have darker trees, so the darker pepper moths are becoming more camouflaged, and now these are getting picked off and they're getting eaten. We have a few problems though here with that. Number one is some of these were placed there. These moths were placed, they're nocturnal animals. They're active at night, not during the day. The pictures were taken during the day. So he would take them and he would place them there, and it's unnatural for them to be there. Normally they reside underneath the tree branch. So they would take them during the day, put them on the tree trunk, and what it did was it trained birds to come get them. And birds don't even actually tend to seem to eat them, but they were doing it. They were trained, it's an easy buffet, easy feast. Not only that, but later pictures seem to be of dead moths that were pinned to the trees. Why would such a thing take place? Why go to such lengths to force a view? Because it's the evolution agenda that needs to be pushed. Remember, science has to be reproducible and verifiable. It has to be reproducible. This is from the College of William and Mary in Virginia. I used to live just down the road from this college in Virginia. It doesn't happen. David West tried it. Cyril Clarke tried it. I tried it. Everybody's tried it. Nobody gets it. Nobody gets the same result. Time after time it's been tried, and it doesn't happen. So the thought was you could see evolution take place from the darker pepper moths and the white, when in fact it's not. Completely fabricated, really. And let's take a look at mutations in fruit flies. Fruit flies are used to study mutations because you can sort of manipulate them a little easier. But mutations rarely produce something better. Oftentimes, in fact, it produces something far worse. Here you have different mutations. Here you have rudimentary wings. Here you have a rotated abdomen, curled wings, and vestigial wings here, and so on and so on. And these would not produce a better species. This would not be survival of the fittest. Mutations would not produce something bigger and better and stronger. Actually, it's quite the opposite. All of these creatures, as a result of these mutations, would have been canceled out by survival of the fittest. They wouldn't have survived. They would have been eaten. And for that matter, I know there's the same-sex agenda taking place that is really, really popular right now. And same-sex couples would actually be canceled out in survival of the fittest because it's not the ability to be able to reproduce. So that idea, with that being a better lifestyle and connected oftentimes with evolution, and it's not survival of the fittest at all. We're going down as society. Here you have a better view, a close-up view. Here you have a normal fruit fly, and here you have a mutation of a leg where an antenna is supposed to be. So mutations are losing information, not adding new information. In other words, you can't have a wing sprout out if the information is not already there for it. Let's take a look at dogs. They now know that all dogs today have descended from the gray wolf. And this is perfectly compatible with what the Bible says about creation and with the ark. You see, with all of the dogs, you wouldn't need every single breed of dog to get into the ark. You would have only needed a blue one and a pink one, just so you can make sure that you can have more dogs. So the information has been bred out of the dog. So if it started with the gray wolf, information has been bred out to get down to a Chihuahua. You will never be able to breed out from a Chihuahua back up to a wolf. Why? Because the information is no longer there. It's been removed. You can't go back up. You can go down, you can't go back up. So it's not evolution, it's adaptation. It's selecting these things. So there's no new information being added in. What about animals on the endangered species list? Take a look at some of these animals, the panda, the elephant, the orangutan. Why is there so much money, so much time invested to protect endangered animals? Well, if you think about it, what's the point? These animals, they had their shot, they lived, they died, they didn't make the grade. So what? Move on. Should be no big deal. They should be replaced by some bigger, better species, right? Well, we know that's not the case at all. In reality, when a species is gone from the earth, that's it. There's no more. That's why we work so hard to protect them, to maintain and keep them here. Environmentalists are doing a good work because they know once they're gone, they're gone. They're not being replaced by something bigger and better. That leads us to ask the question, why are some creatures today so much smaller than their ancient counterparts? Well, you think about it, you think of the giant mastodon who's dated at 60 to 40 million years ago. I mean, you don't go downtown and see very many mastodons walking around now, do you? So where did they go? Why are they so different than elephants that we see today? They're dated at 60 to 40 million years ago. Man is dated at 3 to 3.5 million years ago. Modern man only at 1.5 million years ago. But then they ran into a problem. They found spears in the side of a mastodon. Whoopsie. Now, they found where these mastodons, the meat is even still good to eat. I mean, you couldn't eat it, but a dog or something could eat it. And they'll never allow modern technology like spears to be placed with man 68 million years ago. So what do? They throw away 60 million years of evolution, move the mastodon up to modern man. Let's take a look. We wanted to know, why are the counterparts of animals so much smaller today? Here you see my my son and my daughter here. They hate this picture, but I love it. Here we have a picture of a giant ground sloth. They're enormous creatures. They get up to 5 tons, 6 meters in length, and reach as high as 17 feet. Now, you don't see very many ground sloths walking around today, do you? But we have many examples of them in fossils and skeletons. Why don't we see them today? Well, let's take a look at the saber-toothed tiger. Why do we not see saber-toothed tigers today? How about these large animals? You used to see these enormous. This creature here is about as big as a Volkswagen Beetle. They're just enormous. What happened? Something called insular dwarfism. It's a form of phyletic dwarfism. It's a process and condition of the reduction in size of large animals over a number of generations, when their population's range is limited to small environment, primarily islands. What does that mean? Imagine this. Imagine you have an island and you have some animals on it that are beginning to grow and they're populating. Now, they have a choice: either die, move off the island, or their bodies, by a perfect design of God, can adapt and they can change. They can restrict their size so they become smaller. And we see that today. Even you can watch it happen within a few generations, and the size of an animal can be reduced to up to 1/3 its size due to lack of food and room and so on. And let's take a look at, while we're talking about adjustments in animals, what about Darwin's finches? Finches may have different shaped beaks within the same species. Now, when Darwin was on the HMS Beagle and he was going to the different islands, what he noticed was that some of the finches had different beaks and they could be identified with their islands. Someone would say, well, that finch is from that island. Well, how do you know that? Because of the beak shape. Well, are they all evolving, or is it simply adaptation? Remember, all of the information contained for a finch to have a beak is already in its DNA. Now, that a finch is never going to lay an egg and a bird's going to come out with a terrestrial mammal's nose. You're never going to find a finch egg with a snout of a dog or something like that. It's going to be a beak every single time. That's the way that God designed the information to be locked inside there. But it can adapt from generation or from area to area to adapt to be more able to live and survive with the different foods that it's eating. And here we have the difference in where we see microevolution versus macroevolution. And essentially, a microevolution is changes within the same species, gradual changes. And macroevolution is complete changing from one species to another. And here there are some examples that that evolutionists try to use as examples of transitional fossils changing from one species to another. And one of them is Tiktaalik. And despite substantial differences between fossilized fish, Tiktaalik, and terrestrial pteropods, many evolutionists insist the fish was a transitional form. However, the fleshy fins of Tiktaalik do not attach to the bony pelvis and so could not support weight for walking. Furthermore, the bones in the fins of these fossils do not resemble digits. It does not seem to be a transitional fossil. In fact, there is not a single indisputable transitional form fossil that has been discovered. And this was a real problem for Charles Darwin. As by this theory, he says, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in the crust of the earth? Why is not all nature in confusion instead of being, as we see them, well-defined species? In other words, we should see one animal gradually making attempts and eventually becoming another animal. We should see a whale eventually becoming a cow, or a cow becoming a whale or something. We don't see that. If it were so, where are all of these fossils? It's not there. And you know, sometimes lack of evidence is evidence. If it's not there, there's a reason it's not there. Let's take a look at some incredible creatures. This is one of my favorite parts of this series. I love to look at the animals that God has created. There is a law that Michael Behe discovered that is something called irreducible complexity. An irreducible complex system is composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes a system to effectively cease functioning. I know that's a complicated way of saying it, but let's put it this way. Let's use the mousetrap, for example. A mousetrap is the most basic form of a mousetrap. Without any one of these items here, without the hammer, the mousetrap doesn't function. Without the hold down bar, the mousetrap doesn't function. Without the spring, the mousetrap doesn't function. You get the point. All of those things have to be there for this to be a working item. So the idea was, if that's the case with a mousetrap, is it like that for some animals? All of the parts of the animal have to be there at once, or the animal does not function. Let's take a look at the bombardier beetle, for instance. A bombardier beetle produces a chemical explosion that should blow the bug up. It should, it should make this spark, this explosion, and it should blow the bug to pieces, but it doesn't. Why doesn't it? It has an asbestos-like lined firing chamber, and it consists of many little explosions. If you see, look it up on YouTube or something, if you see it, it's like one bang, but when you slow it down the footage, it's bang, 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 bang. It's a bunch of rapid successions. How did God know to instill that into the creature? It could not evolve into that. The first time it tried to do this explosion, it should blow up and die. No more bombardier beetle. It can't gradually learn that it needs to be rapid, successive explosions. And it had to be sequential. Here's an amazing fact for you. You know what the world's strongest animal is? The world's strongest animal can carry 850 times its weight. It's a beetle. It's a beetle. It's absolutely amazing how God has created these creatures. Take a look at a giraffe here. Giraffe is up to 18 feet tall, has a heart up to 2.5 feet long, and it needs that large heart to pump the blood up to the brain. If the heart's not big enough, the blood's not going all the way up its neck, has low blood pressure, falls down, dies, gets eaten by a lion. So imagine when it bends down to drink, and all that blood pumping should be coming down, and it should burst the animal's brain, should fall over, fall down, die, no more giraffe, gets eaten, no more. But something amazing here happens. There's a sponge in its brain that absorbs the blood. And now imagine this. Imagine it hears a predator, and then it pops up quickly, and then it runs, falls over, not enough blood getting to its brain, and then it dies, gets eaten, no more giraffe. Did you ever lay down and watch TV for too long, and then you stand up real quick, you get lightheaded, you got to sit back down? That should happen to the giraffe every single time. Now imagine this here. Imagine the giraffe is drinking, and the blood's shooting down, but it has the sponge that protects its brain. Now it puts up its head real quick, shouldn't be able to get enough blood to its brain, but there's spigots to it that gives it another little burst to its brain, and it has the right amount of blood at the right time, and it functions perfectly well. All of those things had to be in the giraffe at the same time, otherwise you get no giraffe. It can't successively become better and better. The woodpecker, take a look at this. The foot on the woodpecker is shaped like an X. On most other birds, that's 3 in the front and 1 toe in the rear. But the woodpecker, it's designed in a way where it can latch onto the tree. That way when it's pecking, it doesn't fall off. It has a tail like a tripod. It's stronger than other birds, so it can brace itself. And it has a cartilage in between its beak and skull right there. That way when it's drilling its head into the wood, Woody Woodpecker lied to me when we were children. I used to think growing up that when the Woody Woodpecker and the woodpeckers were drilling into the tree, I thought they were eating the wood. They're drilling holes so they can get in to get the insects. The equivalent of what the woodpecker does is the same thing as you smashing your head against a concrete wall. You can't successively do that. You hit the concrete wall once, fall over, the bird falls to the ground, gets eaten, no more woodpecker. The woodpecker has a 10-inch tongue that extends beyond the beak, so it can go in and it can grab the insect. It has a barbed tongue, so it can stab the insect and pull it out and eat it. But sometimes that doesn't work, so it also produces a glue. So it goes in, it stabs it, it produces a glue, and it should come back, swallow the bug and its tongue, fall off the tree, get eaten, and die. But it doesn't. It also produces a solvent to dissolve the glue so it can eat the bug and it can survive. Every time that it's drilling its head into the wall, into the tree rather, it nails, pulls back, opens its eyes, refocuses, closes, strikes again. And it does that every single time. If it didn't, kept its eyes open and plowed its head in, the eyeballs would pop out, the bird would fall off, get eaten, no more bird. It's absolutely amazing. In fact, the European greenwood woodpecker has a tongue that wraps up behind its brain, and when it wants to, it shoots it out and it can eat the bugs. Absolutely fascinating the way God has designed this. Take a look at the Australian incubator bird. This bird, it's a very small bird, relatively speaking, that can make an 18-foot wide nest up to 6 feet high. This is a 3.5-pound bird that lays a 1.5-pound egg. The egg has coned pores, and when it's ready to hatch, it scratches out, and as it's scratching out, it gets more air and it can survive. It's absolutely fascinating. The bird has to keep the nest at 91 degrees precisely for 7 months. If it varies a degree either way, the incubator bird dies. No more bird, no more turkey, and you have no more creature. The nest has to be kept at 99% humidity. It's absolutely fascinating. And then once it hatches, sometimes it hatches upside down. It can take up to 3 days to dig out. And by this time, mom and dad are gone. They're nowhere to be found. It knows where to eat, where to go get food. 1 year later, builds its own nest, keeps the same. How does it know how to do all of this? To keep the nest at the right temperature, at the right humidity. It's absolutely amazing the way that God has designed these creatures. Take a look at the egg, the incredible edible egg. There are holes in the egg for air and waste removal. Did you ever put an egg in water to boil it and you see the bubbles that come out? Well, those are the pores in the egg. That's how the bird can survive. There's a membrane on the shell, and there's an egg sac, or an air sac here in the egg. On day number 5, the heart begins to pump, and blood vessels grow out and hook onto the membrane, one for breathing, another one grows to hook out, and one to expel waste. Then 2 more hook out to eat. And then at that time, it only has a few days to survive, but God has given it something called an egg tooth. At day 19, it pokes a hole into the air sac down here, and then it only has 6 hours to breathe. The blood vessels disattach, and the bird is out on day 21. How does all of this happen? If any of those things didn't happen in the right order at the exact right time, you get no more egg. Now here's one for you. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, it's very, very easy. It had to have been the chicken. God created all land and now, is the chicken considered a bird of the sky, or is it considered a land creature? God created all that on days number 5 and 6. Had to have been created as an adult so it can have the egg, so it could care for its young, and so on. Amazing how God created these creatures. Take a look at the beaver. The beaver dam has 2 entrances. One to let the good gases in and the bad gases out, and they store their food at the bottom of the stream. The beaver has transparent eyelids, so it can have its eyes open, see what it's doing in the water without it harming its eyelids. Has an ear and nose flaps, so it can open its, so it can do the work that it needs to do without drowning. It has a fur-like lined flap that protects its molars. Evidently, they seem to be sensitive. The front teeth that are used for, chewing the wood and don't seem to be as sensitive as the back teeth, but God's put a protective item in there. And it will use its tail as a rudder. It'll drag the the branches across the river, making mathematical calculations, doing what it needs to do. If all of these things weren't in place at the right time, the beaver would die. There are architects that study beaver dams so they can understand how to make better buildings. Let's continue into the platypus, the duck-billed platypus. This one just completely baffled scientists for a long time. In fact, the first people that saw duck-billed platypus, they thought it was a fake. The explorers first saw it, thought it was composed of hides of several different animals sewn together. Now, this is an animal that eats shrimp, and it seems to detect electrical impulses in the water. And they've done studies. They've put a battery and they've put shrimp in there, dead shrimp, to see where the platypus would go to. It goes to the battery. It's detecting those electrical impulses. Now, the duck-billed platypus is a mammal that lays eggs. Now, there are not very many animals in the animal kingdom that do this. In fact, the echidna is about the only other one that does that as well. It's known as a monotreme. The duck-billed platypus has a venomous spur on its heel, and it secretes milk through skin, right through its skin, not through its nipples. This is just a completely baffling creature. And you just have to wonder, did God give us this creature to just challenge us? Well, let's continue here. These are known as monotremes, and essentially they have one hole that does everything. Use your imagination for that. Let's talk about the black and yellow garden zipper spider. This is it's a small spider, and it'll spin a web that's 2 feet long. The spider itself is only 2 inches long, and it can do 7 different kinds of web. This creature can do one type of web that's non-stick, so it can run on, and then a sticky type of web to catch bugs on. And then the babies shoot out sheets of web, or the adults shoot out sheets of web to roll the prey and eat it. And then it produces an egg sac that's a different kind and color. It's tan and different kind of webbing. And then it puts 30 to 55 eggs in a sac, and it puts them in from the bottom, seals it up, and it will stay there sometimes for an entire winter at a time. This spider, when it has the babies, can shoot out a web streamer. Well, acts sort of like a parachute that'll carry it away. And these creatures have been seen up to 15,000 feet in the air, 1,500 miles from home. Absolutely amazing. They also produce something that's called a molting fluid. Now, these spiders, they know to produce a molting fluid, to put it in the back. They open up a hatch in their shell, and then they crawl out of their skin, and then they can continue to grow and to survive. How does it know to do the molting fluid? How does it know where to? How does it know to crawl out? How does it know to do the different types of web? How does it know to shoot the streamer, fly? How does it know where to be safe? How does it know any of these things unless God told it to? Let's talk about the gecko. The gecko is a fantastic creature. You can see on the screen here, it has little tufts of hair on its feet. And if you go up to 35,000 magnifications, they realize that these tufts of hair are actually suction cups. Now, this is a creature that can run upside down on a pane of glass. Now, how does it know how to do it? The suction has to be just right. If the suction is too tough, it can't run, and it stays there, gets eaten by something else. If it's not suction tight enough, it runs, falls down, gets eaten, and no more gecko. All of these things had to be done in the right order and the right time for it to survive. Let's talk about the chuckwalla lizard. The chuckwalla lizard is found a little bit more northern Arizona. It's an interesting creature. This lizard has a blanket of skin on its back that changes color, and it's a darker color that gives it more heat, less color, less heat. And it will expand when it hides into a rock or runs into a crevice, and it can expand itself. So if a predator gets it, it can't pull it out. It's a wonderful survival technique. It also it has such a high salt diet, it can detour the blood through this little desalination factory and to purify its blood, and it can sneeze out pure salt crystals. How does it know to do that? How does it know that it needs to do that? Let's take a look at the whale. The blue whale is the largest animal ever. Tongue can be as heavy as an elephant. Sperm whale can dive down at 550 feet per minute. And it can be, there's one atmosphere every 12 feet. In a 70-foot long whale, this can be in 3 or 4 different atmospheres at a time. And there's different pressure zones, and it should collapse the creature, but it doesn't. It can turn off and on different pressure zones. It can redistribute where it needs to be. So it has a heart that can weigh up to 1 ton, pumping blood, can close off certain parts of the circulatory system, directing pressure inside of its body. And it's absolutely amazing how God has created this creature. This is one of my favorites here. This is called the Pacific golden plover. This little guy is about the size of a dove. And it lives in Alaska, and it flies to Hawaii, all the way down to Hawaii in the winter. This is an 88-hour nonstop flight. There's no land in between. This is 3 days and 4 nights nonstop. It has to eat a lot to gain 70 grams of burnable energy. It burns 1 gram per hour, and that should only give it about 70 hours of flight time. Remember, this is a 88-hour nonstop flight. Now, they don't swim. They can't go halfway between Alaska and Hawaii. They can't just float in the ocean and swim and then go the rest of the way. There's nothing in between. And how does it know where to go every single time? Imagine here, if you're flying and you've got side winds blowing and everything, it should go way off course, but it doesn't. It lands at the same spot on the same beach every time. It can lose up to 50% of its weight, and it's amazing how it survives. It can't go a little further each year. You either make the journey or you don't. Let's take a look at the dragonfly. It's called a dragonfly because of its strong, fierce jaw. The dragonfly can live in water as a larva for 1 to 2 years. It eats tadpoles and some fish, etc. When a tadpole is attacked, it sends a signal to the other tadpoles. They change color and they swim away fast to escape. And the dragonfly has over 30,000 facets in its eyes. 30,000 facets. And it can see prey at 40 feet away, and very, very few escape. It has 2 sets of wings. And the front wings are for lift, the rear wings are to propel it. Now the dragonfly can fly backward and forward mid-flight, changing the directions of the wings and the way that they flap. How does it do that? How does it not fall apart? And God has given it these channels to keep it strong. In fact, aviation experts are studying the dragonfly to make the best flying machine they possibly can. Let's talk about the firefly. The firefly is a very unique creature. In fact, last time I was doing this creation series live, somebody brought me up a little piece of paper from a newspaper or something from years ago and said, "Here, you got to talk about the firefly. It's amazing what it can do." And I said, "Guess what? You're going to hear about the firefly in about a half an hour tonight." The firefly is amazing. It produces a cold light. It's called luciferin. Here's luciferin and luciferase. If that sounds familiar, think Lucifer. Lucifer means light bearer. Luciferin, luciferase, it creates this cold light. We cannot produce this light still to this day. And they believe that it lights up to find its mates, and it light up in exact sequences. It can light up an entire tree just like this, all at one shot, bam, just like somebody turning on a light switch. It's not like it gradually lights here from the bottom to the top, or specks here or there at a time. That's bam, all at once, just like a light is turned on. How do they do that? How do they know that? What sort of signal do they use? All of these things have to be there at the same time, otherwise the creature cannot survive. all of the evidence that we've looked at how does life begin? We've looked at evidence in the textbooks, and some of the textbooks that our children are being fed today in school may have an evolutionary slant, in spite of the fact that some of the information has been completely and blatantly disproven, some of it over 100 years ago. Where are you going to put your faith? Where are you going to put your money, on creation or evolution? Either you created with a purpose, or you're here as the result of an accident and a random chain of sequences. My money is going to be on a loving God that has given his son to die on the cross for us. Check back for the next presentation. We're going to look at the most incredible creature. We're going to look at understanding creation and evolution in humanity. You won't want to miss that one. This whole series has been funneling down to this point. We're going to see how do we explain ancient man? How do we explain Australopithecus and all these ancient human skeletons that what does the evidence suggest? Well, check back with us next time on Behold the Savior. Thank you, and God bless.